Coming up on this episode of Crime Family.
A frantic phone call to Mirna's husband, Arif Samarko, from her friend Hani said that Mirna was experiencing seizures and foam was coming out of her mouth. Jessica is then seen on this footage sitting down and placing her 3 large shopping bags on the table, moving and arranging them ever so slightly, which perfectly obscures the view of this other security camera.
Because you mentioned that she was afraid of Jessica. Why was she afraid of her? Was she afraid for her life? She wasn't afraid enough to let Jessica sit with her drink for an hour.
He's asking her, where did the cyanide come from? Or do you know how it got in there? And she is answering his questions, but she's almost smiling and she doesn't seem shocked or anything. She's just very smiley, and there's pictures of her, any press conference she's at. It's just very much like she's kind of loving the attention. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Crime Family. I'm your co-host AJ, and I'm here with my 2 sisters Stephanie and Katie. And in this episode, I'm going to be telling you all about the Mirna Salihin case. And this is a case that actually happened overseas back in January of 2016. And it was a pretty high profile case in Indonesia where it happened, and it was actually called their trial of the century. So I would probably compare it to similar to the Casey Anthony case, or maybe even the OJ case in Indonesia. That's kind of what it was like, huge press attention, and everyone was kind of watching the trial as it was happening. So Olivier was a cafe in Jakarta, Indonesia, located inside an upscale shopping mall. And it was a popular spot for locals and tourists alike. And on January 6th, 2016, it was here where Mirna Salihin met 2 of her best friends for a coffee date. However, that day, it also became a crime scene. So not long into her meeting with her 2 friends, Mirna loses consciousness suddenly at the table, and the ambulance has to be called. A frantic phone call to Mirna's husband, Arif Samarko, from her friend Hani said that Mirna was experiencing seizures and foam was coming out of her mouth. The manager of the restaurant says in an interview with 60 Minutes Australia that she thought Mirna was having an epileptic seizure or something. That's kind of what it just looked like objectively, but Mirna had no known history of epilepsy. Mirna is rushed to a local hospital and unfortunately dies before she arrives. Immediately, the investigation into Mirna's cause of death begins. The question initially was, how could somebody be completely fine one minute, then all of a sudden lose consciousness and have a violent seizure the next without any explanation? At first, there was no foul play that was suspected. Perhaps there was a medical explanation for what happened, like maybe an underlying health condition or just a random medical emergency that just isn't immediately explainable or preventable. However, there are a lot more sinister details at play in this case than is immediately clear. So that's kind of the initial scene that sort of sets into motion this investigation into Mirna's death. But I'm going to take you back a little bit into Mirna's earlier life. And this was a life that was filled with promise and adventure years before she tragically took her final breaths inside the Jakarta café. Born on March 30th, 1988, alongside her twin sister Sandy in Jakarta, Mirna had a pretty typical upbringing. She grew a passion for design and decided to move to Sydney, Australia to study after high school. She began attending Billy Blue Design College in the fall of 2007. It was during this time in Australia where she met the 2 friends that she was at the cafe with that day, Hani Boon and Jessica Wongso, as well as her eventual husband, Arif Samarko. So all 4 of them were from Indonesia, and they were all studying in Sydney at this school, and they all became incredibly close throughout their 4 years at college. So Mirna was kind of just Of course, it was her first time in Australia. She was new there, so she immediately sort of just set out to find other people from Indonesia that she could connect with, and get to know the city and just kind of grow her little community there. And so the four of these people became really, really close. After graduating, after 4 years, three of them, Mirna and Arif, who was then her boyfriend, and Hani, returned to Jakarta. But Jessica Wongso stayed behind in Sydney in hopes of becoming a permanent resident. So the three of them moved back and they still kept in pretty regular contact, but Jessica was the only one that stayed behind in Australia. And they kind of lost a little bit of contact with Jessica at this time, just kind of drifted apart or just weren't seeing her all the time. And Mirna actually didn't see Jessica again in person for a few years until 2014, and she was on a trip to Sydney and she decided to visit Jessica. And after not seeing each other for 3 years, they kind of began to realize that they just drifted apart and they were maybe different people now than they once were, and they just weren't compatible really as friends anymore. And in this one meeting that they had in 2014, it resulted in an argument between the two after Mirna told Jessica that she didn't approve of her new boyfriend. And apparently it was so bad that Jessica kind of just went silent, and then she got up and left the restaurant and left Mirna there to pay for the whole bill. In an interview with 60 Minutes Australia, Mirna's husband Arif explains that Mirna was very honest and frank with her friends. Like, she was the type to, tell it like it is. She would sometimes offer tough love advice to her friends, and while she definitely meant well, he admits that sometimes it could come off as a bit harsh. So maybe she was just kind of using a little bit of this tough love sort of charm on Jessica, and Jessica just wasn't really receptive of it on this particular day. So this argument between the two of them did not end well. So after this encounter, their friendship was pretty fractured. In fact, Arif claims that Mirna became fearful of Jessica after this incident, and she said that she was scared to meet up with her alone. There was just something about Jessica in that moment that struck fear inside of Mirna.
What could she have said that would make their relationship turn so bad so quickly, I wonder?
Yeah, I don't know. I think in the interview with 60 Minutes, Arif says that he kind of, in his mind, kind of played out what the conversation could have been like. So he's like, it was probably something like, how could you be so stupid? Like, he's not good for you. You need to dump this guy or whatever. And I guess she was just being really kind of harsh. But if that was kind of her demeanor, she would have been like that the entire time they knew each other. So Jessica shouldn't have been surprised by this. For whatever reason, it really did fracture their friendship. And I guess that they were kind of probably drifting apart a little bit already. Like I said, they had gone 3 years without seeing each other, and Mirna was close with the others, and Jessica just kind of fell out of touch with the group. And for Jessica specifically, this encounter with Mirna was a major disappointment, and it sent her on a downward spiral. In 2015, Jessica was hospitalized 5 times for attempting to commit suicide. In one incident in August of that year, she drove her car into a nursing home, and she only missed the bedrooms of several of the residents by mere feet. So it was a pretty close call. She didn't hurt anyone. She didn't end up hurting anyone, but it was a very close call. She suffered 2 cracked ribs and an injury to her chest, and the police believe that she was intoxicated at the time of the incident. And there were other friends of Jessica's that did report that she was beginning to abuse alcohol around this time. And in addition to this, her friends Mirna and Arif tied the knot in Bali soon afterwards, and Jessica was not invited to the wedding. So Arif says that this was because of the fear that Mirna had towards Jessica. They just decided it would be best if she wasn't invited to the wedding. And to make matters worse, Jessica was fired from a graphic design job shortly after the wedding. So by all accounts, Jessica's life was completely falling apart and Mirna's was flourishing. So, she lost her job, her 2 best friends are getting married, she's not invited, and she's starting to abuse alcohol. So it's very different than Mirna's life, who, she's moved back to Jakarta, she just got married, and she has a really good life. In an attempt to run from all of these newfound troubles in her life, Jessica decides to leave Australia and return home to Indonesia. There's a YouTube channel that covers this case. It's called The Coffee House Crime, and in this video, they're talking about the case. They describe alleged text messages from Jessica to another friend. And in these text messages, Jessica says, quote, "I could use the money to have an epic holiday. rather than giving money to those ignorant police, blank, end quote. And then she also says in another text, quote, I'm being pushed again and again, I'll break, end quote. So Jessica was fined as a result of her car crash earlier in the year, like the one where she crashed her car into the nursing home. So she did end up getting charged and fined with that. So she did owe a bit of money in that case. So this is the money that she's referring to, saying that she could use that money to have this epic holiday rather than paying the fines that she owed. Jessica eventually does decide to leave Sydney after several years, and she returns home to Jakarta. And only 2 days after returning to Jakarta, Jessica reached out to Mirna and invited her out for coffee at Olivier, which is the cafe that Mirna dies in just days later. So Mirna reluctantly agrees to meet up and attempts to patch this rift between them, but because she was still fearful of Jessica, it was her husband who suggested that she take another friend with her to the cafe just to be safe. So Mirna invited Hani, who was their other mutual friend, who they met in Sydney as well. The three friends agreed to meet at Olivier at 5 p.m. on January 6th, but CCTV cameras captured Jessica arriving at the cafe 90 minutes before their scheduled meeting time. So she enters the cafe at about 3:30 p.m. And then shortly after this, like just a couple minutes later, she leaves and returns about 45 minutes later at 4:14 p.m. with 3 large shopping bags. Inside each shopping bag was a small bottle of liquid hand soap. Now, Jessica claims that she left the cafe to buy gifts for her 2 friends that she was meeting with, and she comes back with little bottles of liquid hand soap. So, I mean, that's kind of a weird gift. I don't know. And they were small bottles, but in each one in a separate bag, which seems kind of excessive. They're small enough she could fit them all into one bag. So it's just a little bit weird, those details. So, her story was that she went early, scoped out the restaurant, then she went and did her shopping and came back after. So when Jessica returns at 4:14 p.m., she can clearly be seen on the security footage looking around the cafe. She's looking at the ceiling, looking at the walls, and looking in the direction of the security camera. So it's almost as if she's kind of scouting out the positions of the cameras and the distance from her table. And according to 60 Minutes Australia, there were 2 security cameras that could have captured her table. One was obscured by some greenery in one corner of the cafe, but the other had a clear, direct shot of the table. Jessica is then seen on this footage sitting down and placing her 3 large shopping bags on the table, moving and arranging them ever so slightly, which perfectly obscures the view of this other security camera. Then, in another suspicious occurrence, Jessica texts Mirna and Hani and insists on pre-ordering their drinks for them. So she's, that they'll already be at the table and ready to drink when the pair arrives. Mirna and Hani kind of push back and they say, no, it's fine. We'll just order them when we get there. It's no big deal. But Jessica insists. So after sitting down and arranging her shopping bags, Jessica orders an iced coffee and 2 cocktails, which are brought to the table at 4:24 p.m., which is still a full 36 minutes before their scheduled meeting time. Mirna and Hani arrive at Olivier at 5:16 p.m., and by this time, the drinks have already been on the table for 52 minutes. Within seconds of sitting at the table, Mirna can be seen on the security footage taking a sip of the iced coffee, and it's clear from this footage that something isn't quite right with the drink, and it has a strange taste. She's seen kind of fanning her hand around her mouth after sipping the iced coffee, like kind of what you do when, I don't know, if something tastes gross or something. So that's kind of the action or the motion that she's making on the security footage. She even asks Hani and Jessica to smell the coffee. Hani agrees that something seems off, but neither she or Jessica take a sip of the coffee. Within minutes, Mirna's head slips back and she begins seizing with foam coming out of her mouth. As I described earlier, Hani calls Arif in a panic, saying that she's convulsing, there's foam coming from her mouth, and the ambulance is then called. Security footage shows Jessica looking on, seeming confused but not panicked at all. And the manager of the cafe actually recalls in an interview with 60 Minutes Australia that Jessica asked her almost instantly, quote, "What did you put in the coffee? That's why I saved the drinks," end quote. This accusation puts the manager on her guard about the whole situation almost instantly. And because of this comment by Jessica, the manager decides to keep the iced coffee, which proves vital to the whole investigation. So for whatever reason, like that comment by Jessica, it kind of in the moment, this Mirna's having a seizure, what it looks like a seizure. Everyone doesn't really know what's going on, and no one's really thinking anything of it, of like possibly the iced coffee is like the cause for this. So the fact that Jessica was the one that brought it up like struck the manager as kind of weird. But because of that comment, she thought like, I'll just save this coffee just in case, because it's probably going to lead to some type of investigation. And like I said before, Mirna dies on the way to the hospital. Coroners do an autopsy on Mirna's body and find traces of cyanide in her stomach. Additionally, the police are able to confirm 3 days after her death that the iced coffee, which was kept by the cafe's manager, contained a lethal dose of cyanide as well.
I mean, I've seen other cases where people drink cyanide, but I thought it was tasteless. But maybe, well, I guess it was sitting outside. Was it sunny out? If it's sitting outside in the hot sun for like 52 minutes.
Well, it was indoor. The cafe was indoors.
Yeah, and also I'm pretty sure cyanide is pretty bitter.
Oh, okay. I just thought it was tasteless, but anyway.
Well, I looked up like online. I just typed in like, what does cyanide tastes like? I don't know if anyone looks at my search history, everyone's gonna be like whack with the things, because all these cases I'm looking up in crimes, it's like I typed in like, what does cyanide look like, or where do you get cyanide? One of the things says that it kind of has a smell of like bitter almonds. That's kind of like one thing that came up, and so I assume if it smells like that, it probably has some type of taste.
So those soap bottles that you bought were probably not even soap in them. They could have had cyanide in them.
Well, I think they were soap. I mean, I'll get a little bit into, I mean, not that much into it, but I think they were, because she did go to Bath and Body Works. That's where the soap was from, and she did have the Bath and Body Works bags, so she did buy soap from there. So yeah, instantly they were able to put together that the iced coffee, there were traces of cyanide left in the cup that had the iced coffee in it that Mirna drank from, and they also had traces of cyanide in her system, and there was stomach bleeding in Mirna's body as well, caused by the cyanide, of course. Immediately afterwards, after like the coroner's report and the discovery of the cyanide in the coffee, police focus on Jessica Wongso. Jessica was not searched on the day of Mirna's death, so she was able to walk away out of the cafe without any suspicion. But now, after the cause of death has been determined and the iced coffee Mirna drank from was tested, Jessica was suspect number 1. It's believed by police that Jessica intended to murder Mirna when she arrived at the cafe that afternoon. They allege that Jessica plotted to poison her former friend, arriving at the cafe early, insisting on pre-ordering their drinks, and placing shopping bags on the table in such a way that the actions taking place at the table by Jessica and the movements that she makes cannot be easily detected. Looking at her behavior on the CCTV footage from that afternoon seems to heavily align with this theory. So the 60 Minutes Australia episode about this case, and just on YouTube and stuff, there is footage of the CCTV cameras, and it does seem very kind of to fall in line with that sort of theory. She walks in, she's scouting around, looking in the direction of the cameras, and, you know, picks the one table that is only visible by 2 cameras. One of the cameras is kind of a little bit, like I said earlier, you know, obscured by some like greenery that they have at the corner of the cafe, and there's only one camera that has like a direct shot, and that's, you know, she puts the bags to kind of obscure that specific camera. Like that's what the police are theorizing at this time. Remember that job that Jessica was fired from shortly before she returned to Jakarta? Well, during the course of the investigation into Jessica's past, the police interviewed Christy Carter, and she was Jessica's former boss at New South Wales Ambulance. And during the course of a 9-hour interview with her, Christy admits that she has no doubt that Jessica is capable of killing or harming someone. She also admits that Jessica once told her that she knew how to use poison to kill. And Jessica even once threatened to kill Christy and her mother a couple of weeks before she left Sydney. So those are huge red flags as well. And this was a 9-hour long interview where they got lots of information about sort of what Jessica was like according to her former boss. And these were all things that came up in this interview. So definitely not, you know, a great look for Jessica, for her to be saying these things. She's threatened to kill her boss. I don't know necessarily in the context of how that happened, if it was kind of a comment that she just threw out there, or if it was something more direct, but that's kind of what ended up happening was that she threatened to kill Christy and her mother. Police were initially worried that because Jessica was a permanent resident of Australia, that maybe she would flee Indonesia and go back to Australia. So they really did have to be quick in their initial investigation to kind of get all these pieces together. And they did arrest Jessica on January 30th, 2016 for the murder of Mirna Salihin. And this would have been only, 24 days after the initial incident. So it did happen pretty quickly, but I'm kind of surprised that she didn't try to flee in that 3-week time period, because she could have went back to Australia. I mean, I'm sure they still could have caught her, maybe extradited her back, but they were worried that that would be something that they would have to, that would be hard to do. So they just really wanted to make sure that they arrested her before she had the chance to flee. So police believe that Jessica had the motive, intent, and opportunity to poison and murder Mirna that day. And Mirna's sister Sandy believes that Jessica was so jealous of Mirna's successful life compared to her own that she decided to murder Mirna because of it. Do you guys have any thoughts so far about any of the CCTV footage or Jessica herself? Or
Yeah, one of my first questions was going to be, I thought there was CCTV footage, so when they see her poisoning the drink, but you already said that she had placed the bags in a way that would have hidden that. And now I'm thinking that obviously this was planned out, because it's not like she could have just gone to the mall or Bed Bath & Beyond and picked up some cyanide. So she probably had that with her the entire time and was thinking this whole plan through. So it wasn't just kind of a spur of the moment. It was planned from even probably before she invited her out. So that's, a meticulous plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that was one of the main things for me too. I was in order to poison somebody with cyanide, you have to go get cyanide first, which you can't just, like you said, you can't just go to a store and buy it. You have to, I don't even know where you get it. Like I said, I was searching, how do you even get it? Probably on the black market somewhere. I don't know if they obviously don't sell it in stores, but
yeah, they probably sell it for certain things, I don't know, rat poison or something might have something like that in it. I don't know, but yeah, it's not just something you could just buy pure cyanide off the shelf, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. So like you said, for her to even, if this police theory of her doing it, she would have had to have had that in advance, which obviously shows premeditation, obviously.
I find it I'm trying to think of the word, but anyways, when she was trying to tell her friends that oh, I'll just buy your drinks, pre-order your drinks for you, and they're oh no, that's okay, we'll get them when we get there. But she was so adamant that she wanted to buy her drinks. For me, it'd be a red flag. Why does she want us to have her drinks pre-ordered for us when we can just do it ourselves?
Well, yeah, I was thinking that too, because you mentioned that she was afraid of Jessica. So what was she afraid of her? Or why was she afraid of her? Was she afraid for her life with her? Was she just afraid that, I don't know, they would make a scene in public, it'd be embarrassing? Or she wasn't afraid enough to let Jessica sit with her drink for an hour. You know what I mean? So I'm kind of thinking she wasn't that kind of afraid of her, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and that's what, and her husband Arif, he doesn't go into detail about the nature of what she was scared of. He didn't say she was afraid that Jessica was going to kill her or anything like that. He just says that she was afraid to be alone with her, or she was afraid to meet with her alone. So for whatever, I guess having that other friend there would be a good buffer. So I obviously she didn't necessarily fear for her life necessarily, because if there's someone that you fear for your life of being around them, you're not going to go with them, and then you're not going to let them be with your drink unattended for nearly an hour, because that's also, and the 60 Minutes, they say that it was very unlike Jessica to offer to pre-order. She had never really done that before, so it would have been kind of a new thing. So obviously Mirna and Hani thought it was weird, but they just let her do it. Again, it's hard to say they shouldn't have done that, what were they thinking, but also you're not necessarily thinking that that's gonna happen.
Yeah, and I guess if you are afraid for your life, you're not going to try and reconcile that relationship. You're probably just going to let, that relationship die. So I guess that is kind of a good point, where she wasn't afraid for her life. In other words, she would have probably not even met up with her at all, like you said.
Yeah. So Yeah, that's a good point. She's not going to try to reconcile with somebody who she's afraid is going to kill her. That's not really a relationship that's worth salvaging. So it probably wasn't that deep or it wasn't that intense, but...
Or also, if she was maybe afraid that Jessica could hurt her in some way, she probably felt safer, A, that her friend was with her, but also that they were in a public place. So she probably felt that Jessica wasn't going to be able to get violent with her in a place like that. So she probably wasn't even thinking... Obviously, you're not going somewhere thinking someone's going to poison your food. So that was probably just kind of off the table, and she was feeling safer that they were in public.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that probably, I don't think, obviously, that Mirna or her husband or Hani knew kind of the extent of what Jessica was going through back in Sydney. Like, obviously, I don't think they knew sort of that she was, struggling with alcohol, that she had been fired, or maybe they knew she had been fired, but like obviously she was on a downward spiral. So it's not like they thought or could see that maybe she was kind of losing it a little bit. It's like they didn't have that. But not knowing information about what the nature of why she was so scared of her, like I feel like if you did know a little bit, like obviously you're not going to know that she threatened to kill her boss. Like that's would make you not want to go meet with her. But she's obviously scared enough. Like something obviously happened, I feel, that made her scared enough to be around her, but not, she still didn't know enough to be scared enough of her. You know what I mean? It's like she was scared, but not scared enough to avoid her completely. So, but yeah, you're also not thinking that somebody's going to poison your food. But I just think like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think of if there was somebody that I was kind of had a little bit of a falling out with, and then they were adamant that they wanted to pre-order my drink, and you knew that they were there that early, or maybe they didn't know how early she was there. But I don't know. It just seems like a very odd thing.
That's what I was saying. Like she was there, 52 minutes early, and before
they might
showed up.
They might not have known that she was at the restaurant that early.
Maybe
I guess, but I mean, what time did they text her? Because she texted them and asked what kind of drinks they wanted. Like, how early was that?
Yeah, well, in the 60 Minutes episode, they show, like, how they show little bubbles come up on the screen that show the text, and those bubbles showed 1 o'clock. So I'm assuming that was the accurate time. They didn't just make that up. But those texts said 1 o'clock, 1:01, 1:04 was like when that conversation
And they didn't
happened.
show up till 5?
Because they planned to meet at 5. So maybe like when they were kind of hammering out the details of like when they're going to meet, they in that conversation, like maybe around 1 o'clock, they're like, okay, let's meet at 5. And then maybe Jessica asked her, because she asked her, one of the texts that comes up is like, what do you guys like to drink? I'll pre-order it for you. And that was at 1 o'clock. So it was still 4 hours before they were supposed to meet. So I don't think they knew, obviously, that Jessica was going to get there that early.
I guess. And I guess it doesn't matter how early she was there. She could have been like 10 minutes early, and she still would have been sitting alone with her drinks. And it just seems like super weird that 4 hours earlier she'd text them and was asking what drinks they want. Like, she knew she was going to be early, knew she was going to have to sit there and wait for them and have their drinks sitting there. So that's just kind of weird, I feel. Like, maybe if you happen to show up early, you can order their drinks, but you already knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, or sometimes if like if you're running late, your friend will say, "Oh, I'll order. What do you want? I'll order your drink. Get it started. So that it's here for you." Like that's a natural, normal conversation if you're running late, but not for them to offer hours in advance.
And especially like if you're ordering an iced coffee and it's sitting there for an hour, like it's gonna be all melted and warm by the time you get there. It's not even gonna be like good anymore.
Yeah, like I doubt she would have wanted it if she knew it was sitting there for 52 minutes. I would have been like, "No, I'll order a new one." Please.
You're like, I want a fresh coffee. Like,
yeah, I don't want this gross this lukewarm coffee.
Like watered down because all the ice is melted coffee.
Yeah.
And like how sometimes if like something tastes funny, you ask your friends to taste it too, but the fact that Jessica didn't want to. Like, if you're a good friend, like, oh yeah, I'll taste it to see if it tastes funny. I don't know. Does anybody ever do that?
Yeah, I mean, just Hani, her other friend, didn't either. Her other friend smelled it, but she didn't actually take a drink of it.
Yeah.
But neither did Jessica. The whole situation is very weird. That would be a huge red flag for me. And maybe not if it's someone you're on really good terms with, who's like your best friend. Okay, like that's not a bad thing. Still 3 hours in advance is a little bit weird. But especially if it's somebody that you've had a falling out with that you're not on the best terms with. Like that should allow for even more red flags to come up, I feel, along the way. But yeah.
For someone who does research for crimes a lot, we see a lot of red flags. So for someone like Mirna and her friend, like, they wouldn't see those red flags. I'm just saying, like, we are so researched and stuff like that, so it's easier for us to see these things than for someone regular like them.
Yeah, I know sometimes it is hard to say what's normal, because if you're really into true crime and you watch all these docs, then you would be like, well, obviously you're not going to do that, that's weird. But for someone who's, yeah, like you said, just for someone who's not even thinking that at all, and who isn't even, you know, like in tune with like the true crime world or anything like that, like these little small things might not seem big. But to me, I still feel like that is weird. Like, at the very least, not that you're thinking it's weird that she's going to put poison in it, but I still feel like it's would raise like alarm, I feel.
It is weird, but also maybe she's thinking that she's not going to make a big deal out of it because she wants to, you know, patch up their relationship. So she's not going to make this huge deal about what she's thinking. Maybe that Jessica is just trying to make a nice gesture, even though it doesn't come off. It comes off as kind of weird to us looking in, but she could be thinking that this is, oh, she's actually like making steps forward to be a good friend, and this is kind of her little small way of trying to do that. So she wasn't going to be like, no, I'm not drinking that. She was like, okay, this is nice. Let's just, you know, try and get along.
Yeah, that's true. And I think you're not even, your mind doesn't necessarily jump to this person is capable of killing someone. Like, you think, okay, this person might be a little bit weird, or maybe she's a little bit impulsive, or she can sometimes get angry really quickly, but you're still not going to jump to, I think she's capable of killing someone. So even you think, what's the worst that can happen? Like, your mind's not going to go to poisoning right away. You're thinking like, the worst that what can happen is what? She's going to like attack me in a public place? Like, she's not going to do that. I don't know. So I think it does make sense that she might be a little bit weird, but she's not enough for her to like not do it.
And I think, again, like, the public place probably comes into play as well, because you don't think someone's going to do something like that with a large public audience around, right? So you feel like you are a little bit safer.
Yeah, if she had invited her over to her house where no one else was going to be, and then said, oh, I'm going to make you some food before you come, then maybe. But the fact that it was a public place might have kind of not been that intense for her. Police allege that in the time between the drinks being delivered to the table and Mirna and Hani arriving at the cafe, Jessica poured a lethal dose of cyanide into the drink. In interviews with her former boss, Christy Taylor, she mentions that Jessica even once told her that if she wanted to kill somebody, she knew the exact dose. And I guess that was in the context. They show like a reenactment of the interview on the 60 Minutes, so they don't show the real footage, but I believe it's still, you know, quotes from what she said. But she says Jessica was hospitalized, and she was telling her boss, like, I want to go home. They're treating me as if I killed someone, but if I was going to kill someone, I know exactly how to do it. I know the exact dose to use. Like, those were the words that she used. So obviously put up next to what happened to Mirna, that obviously seems very incriminating or very suspicious. Additionally, the police also learned that there was a restraining order that was allegedly placed against Jessica by a former boyfriend at some point back in Australia after she allegedly vandalized his car after their breakup, which kind of shows a violent and obsessive history that Jessica was exhibiting. And I don't know if that's the same boyfriend that Mirna had warned her about before that caused their split, but there was a boyfriend that she allegedly vandalized his car.
Who admits that they, like, oh, I didn't murder anybody, but if I did, I would know exactly how? Like, why even put that little tidbit in there?
Yeah, that's very, very weird. And of course it wasn't necessarily a direct quote from Jessica. It was just this boss like telling police that Jessica had said that. So who knows the exact wording that she used? You know, everyone kind of has their own interpretation, and then when they retell a story later, they're kind of putting their own spin on it, or like however they remember it. So who knows what she actually said, if those were the exact words, but still enough to make her creepy and to make Christy think like, oh, this girl actually has like a plan of how she would kill someone if she was going to do it. And she said, like, I would know the exact dose, which is referring to obviously poisoning someone versus, you know, stabbing them or shooting them or something. The highly publicized trial of Jessica Wongso then begins on June 15th, 2016, and it is one of Indonesia's most high-profile cases. Like I said before, it was one of those ones where, it was all over the TVs, 12 hours a day, they're showing this case. There's, commentators who are speculating on it like day after day of the trial. So kind of, like I said, similar to the Casey Anthony case or maybe the OJ one where it's so highly publicized, like that is the equivalent of, or the Jessica Wongso case is the equivalent of that in Indonesia. During the course of all the legal stuff that was happening in the trial, there was an agreement that was reached between Indonesian and Australian authorities. And like I said, Jessica was a permanent resident of Australia. And the agreement was that Australia would share information with Indonesian authorities on the promise that they would not seek the death penalty in the case, which they agreed to. So the information that was shared by Australia was about Jessica's history during her time there. So things such as legal records or medical records. So all of that kind of stuff that was in her past would have been information that they got through the Australian authorities that gave it to Indonesia. But it was on the one condition that Indonesia had to agree to not give the death penalty to Jessica if she was convicted, because a crime like this in Indonesia would probably be given the penalty of the death sentence by firing squad, which probably would have been the route that they would have went. But because they had kind of struck that deal with Australia, then that was off the table. So it would have been life in prison would probably have been the highest that she could have gotten. Jessica hired like a really good defense attorney, and during the trial, his main argument was that there was absolutely no cyanide found in any other organ in Mirna's body other than her stomach. And he argues that it isn't possible for there to be no traces anywhere else. But obviously, nobody just happens to have cyanide in their stomach and also have cyanide in the drink that they just drank from, and then not have there be some correlation. Like obviously if there's cyanide in the drink and there's cyanide in her stomach, like that's a logical conclusion. But he's saying because it was only found in her stomach, none of the other organs like her brains, her lungs, or anything else had traces of cyanide, which apparently is not possible in his argument anyway.
Yeah, but that doesn't make any sense. It's like what she just injected into her stomach. Like what?
I know, how did it get there? It has to get into your stomach, like obviously.
But I feel like that makes sense, like to me anyway, because it happened so quickly that she died and her body didn't have time to digest it anyway. So it sat in her stomach, she died, and your body's not going to continue to work, right? So there is no reason it would be anywhere else.
Like I also, in the Coffee House crime YouTube series that they have, and also like looking at stuff online about cyanide, it kind of, the main thing that it does is that it stops your cells from accepting oxygen or something, or that's kind of, that's about simplifying it. Very.
Yeah, we talked about that in the Jim Jones episode about cyanide, and it does. Yeah.
So that's basically what it does. But so anyway, there was bleeding in her stomach because obviously it's going to like go right through your stomach and cause your stomach to bleed. But was the cause of her death the bleeding stomach, or was it because obviously if you're seizing, it is affecting your brain. Like that's how you seize, right? If she was convulsing, that's your brain being affected by that. So it would have been in her brain though, wouldn't it have been?
Maybe it was just her brain wasn't getting oxygen because the cells stopped absorbing oxygen, and that's what made her seize.
Oh yeah, that's true. And it happened within a matter of seconds, obviously, because from the moment she took the sip to like the time that she starts convulsing, it's like not even a minute, I feel, or maybe it was a minute or two, but very, very quickly. So prosecutors do admit that they don't know how Jessica got the cyanide, and there's no actual footage of her placing cyanide in the drink. So an Indonesian news anchor named Timothy Marbun, who was heavily following the trial and he was reporting on it throughout the whole duration of the trial, he says to 60 Minutes Australia that she can clearly be seen touching the drink and moving the drink once it's on the table, but there's no actual footage of her placing anything into the drink. So perhaps this is all obscured by the 3 large shopping bags that she placed on the table minutes earlier. So he says you can clearly see, which you can, there is some movement behind the bags. Like you can see her moving the drink, but moving a drink doesn't equal poisoning it. So I guess because they didn't have that actual footage of it, like it wasn't as incriminating as it could be. So there was room for some sort of defense. Obviously, if there was footage of her putting it in there, you can't dispute that. But because there was no actual footage of her doing it, that there was kind of that room in there for the defense to come up with something else.
I would assume, though, that the coffee house workers, there would be cameras behind there, too. So it's not like you can accuse somebody back there of putting it in, because they probably would have been monitored the whole time. Is that right?
Yeah, they do show footage in 60 Minutes of the drink back in the kitchen, like after it's taken from the table when that manager reserves it. So she takes it and puts it in the back, and it shows footage of it in the back in the kitchen area. So there were cameras there. And there was also, in the Coffee House Crime YouTube series, they say that there was only 10 other, because it was a Vietnamese iced coffee, like that was the type of that it was, and there was only 10 others that were served that day, and no one else had any other reaction to it. So it's not like you could make the argument that, oh, it was in their big pot of coffee. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't like, oh, it was specific. Nobody else had any reaction to it other than her. So it wasn't like it was in like the communal stuff. It had to be very specifically the one that she drank from. Also, the defense isn't able to dispute the fact that there's cyanide in that iced coffee that Mirna drank, which killed her, but there's no actual evidence that Jessica's the one who put it there. There are arguments that someone else did it. Some disgruntled cafe employee put it in her specific drink. Seems far-fetched. And as it turns out, Jessica's comment to the cafe manager about what was in the coffee is actually what made them save the drink for inspection later. So if you think about it, like if she hadn't have said that, it's very likely that they wouldn't have necessarily kept the coffee, and this key evidence that ties the cyanide in Mirna's stomach to that iced coffee would not have existed. So I guess if Jessica was trying to divert suspicion she didn't do a very good job, because at the time that it happened, it was like immediately as it's happening, Jessica says that to the employee, like, what did you put in the coffee? That's why I ordered them early. That's why I saved them, so that this wouldn't happen. But like no one was thinking anything that it was the coffee.
What? I ordered them early so that you wouldn't poison them? Is that what she means? Like, what does she mean?
Well, yeah, because like the manager, like they interview her in 60 Minutes, and the manager was saying, again, it's not a direct quote from Jessica, but it's her, the manager, retelling it. But she says, yeah, almost immediately she turns to me and says, what did you guys put in the drink? That's why I saved the drinks. So, meaning, what did you put in the drink? That's why I got them early, so that you wouldn't put anything in it. Like, just a very strange thing to say, because at the time no one's thinking it's the drink. Like,
yeah,
people are just thinking like she's having a seizure, you know?
Yeah,
like, no one's
exactly.
thinking.
Like you were saying, they probably wouldn't have even thought about that until it was too late and the drink was already thrown out or something.
Yeah, like if she had said nothing, they wouldn't have thought of the drink. They would have just, you know, when they went, they would have put it in the back, they would have probably thrown it out and did the dishes, and then there would have been no evidence, right? So Jessica, if she was trying to make it less suspicious, she definitely didn't help herself by saying that. Because that's, like I said, that's what made the manager save that. Because she's like, oh, well, you know, obviously then that puts it in her mind, like, oh, maybe it was the drink. So I'll keep it just in case they need to check it later, which they do. And so I got a little bit more information about, like, the Coffee House Crime YouTube series, again, that covers this case. I got a little bit more information about this deal between Australia and Indonesia. So the defense makes the argument during the trial that the Australian authorities should have never shared information with Indonesian authorities, and that they should never have allowed the external information to be used as evidence in the courtroom. So that was their argument. But the prosecutors rebutted this and said that this external information that was provided by Australia only confirmed what was already obvious about Jessica Wongso's unstable, violent, and dangerous behavior. So they were kind of saying, like, well, it just added to our argument. It didn't form our argument, basically. But the defense was trying to get it thrown out by saying it shouldn't be admissible in court because it's an external document or something, which also seems like a very weak argument to be making. And throughout the course of the trial, so all of Jessica's suspicious behavior from that afternoon is described in court in great detail. So everything from her arriving early at the cafe, her looking around in search of the CCTV cameras, pre-ordering the drinks so long before her friends were scheduled to arrive, her placing the bags on the table, etc., etc. And also her buying. She was saying, oh, I went to go scout out the table, and then I went to go do my shopping. She buys 3 little small bottles of soap in 3 separate bags, which seems excessive, because she said, I'm going to go buy gifts for my 2 friends that I'm going to meet up with. So she's like, can I give them hand soap? Like, I mean, teach their own. Yeah. Maybe they're hand soap lovers. I don't know, but
maybe. I feel like a bag for each of them is just they can each take their hand soap home in their own bag.
I guess that's a good point, because I was thinking too, like, why would you put this little small bottle in its own bag, but I guess that would make sense. Other evidence that was presented in the trial through all of this, and this is according to a video by Dr. Todd Grande. He also has a YouTube channel, and he covers a lot of true crime cases. And he kind of looks at them from like a psychological perspective because he's a psychologist. So he kind of breaks it down psychologically, but he covers this case. And in his coverage of the case, he says that Jessica sent a link to a news article to Mirna's sister Sandy about fake cyanide-laced coffees that were being served in Vietnam shortly after the murder. And I guess this was an attempt by Jessica to kind of shift focus or blame. So kind of being like, well, this is a thing that's happening. Like, there's these people that are serving fake coffees laced with cyanide in Vietnam, and this could be an explanation for what happened. So it looks like she's trying to cover her tracks. And then in addition, she was also asking Sandy what the results of the lab tests were on the day of Mirna's death. So this is probably her trying to poke around and see what the results were, if anything could be traced back to her potentially. Dr. Todd Grande says in his video, I hadn't seen this in other sources that I could find, but he says something about during the trial, it was said that the pants that Jessica was wearing were thrown out. I don't know why she would throw her pants out anyway, unless I guess if they had traces of cyanide, if she had the cyanide in her pocket or something, but...
Yeah, she could have spilled them on her pants or something.
Yeah, that's true. And like, also, is it a liquid, or is it like, it must be a liquid, right? I feel like it can come in different forms. If it's liquid, or if it's like a powder, or like a...
It's most likely a liquid. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense. I mean, it could be powder too that just dissolves in the coffee, but probably liquid.
I don't know. I've never bought cyanide, so but I'm assuming it's a liquid if you're gonna pour it into coffee or any type of drink. But
yeah, I think it is a liquid.
And during this whole thing as well, the public and Sandy herself, Mirna's sister, they were shocked by Jessica's seemingly cheerful demeanor throughout the entire trial. So anytime she spoke with the media, she seemed cheerful, and she wasn't at all like somebody who was on trial for the murder of her former best friend. So even the 60 Minutes journalist, he, tries to interview her, like as she's taking the walk from the courthouse to the van, I guess, or whatever. He's asking her, like, where did the cyanide come from, or do you know how it got in there? And she is answering his questions, but she's like almost smiling, and she doesn't seem like shocked or anything. She's just very smiley, and there's pictures of her any press conference she's at. She's very much like she's kind of loving the attention, and that's what Sandy also says. She says she believes that Jessica just loved kind of being at the center of attention for that, and because the trial was getting so much attention, it was like she kind of like thrived off that. So the trial lasted from June until October, and then on October 27th, 2016, Jessica Wongso was found guilty of Mirna Salihin's murder. As millions of Indonesians watched, her sentence was 20 years behind bars, and due to that agreement between Australia and Indonesia, she did not get the death penalty. After the trial was over, Mirna's husband Arif ended up moving back to Australia. This time he went to Melbourne instead of Sydney, but he goes back to Australia in an attempt at a fresh start. Since her conviction, Jessica's attempted to appeal 3 times. She's obviously pleading not guilty. She pled not guilty the whole entire time. All of her appeals were rejected, and she has now exhausted all of her legal options. So, looks like she will be in prison for the full 20 years that she was sentenced for. Which, she was very young at the time. I think she was 24, 25 at the time of it. So, she could be out of prison when she's 45. So it's not like, it's definitely not a life sentence. It's not like she's older where she'll be like 80 or something when she gets out. It's like she could get out at 45, and she will get out at 45 if she spends the full 20 years. So kind of a lighter sentence. Since I feel like they could have given her life. I mean, if Indonesia is going from the death penalty, it seems like they kind of went the opposite way and not giving her a life sentence. Only 20 years.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like enough. Obviously, it should be life, but yeah, I always find it crazy that when a murder, they get less than life. It doesn't make sense to me because it's like murder is like the ultimate crime.
Yeah, and it is weird that murder is the ultimate crime, and it should be a life sentence, and that the decision should be whether it's going to be a death penalty. I mean, I don't believe in the death penalty, so I wouldn't do that. But, you would think like the legal system would be like death penalty or not death penalty. But either way, it's going to be life because it's murder. Whereas like 20 years isn't that much for committing a murder. When you see some people going to jail for life for much less than murder. So 20 years does seem a little bit light. Especially, like I said, and considering that they do have the death penalty in Indonesia by firing squad. So it seems like very drastic. And then this is the other extreme of like not tough enough. So
Yeah, being put to death by firing squad like sounds terrifying.
I know. I feel like I didn't even know, honestly, that was a thing that still existed. But I guess
I know. I can't believe it is a thing. It just seems way too violent. Honestly, I can't believe the death penalty is a thing in general, but that just seems extreme.
Yeah, like I said, I can't. It's crazy to me that there's even a death penalty that is still in existence at all, and how so many people are behind it. But and almost, I mean, we'll get into the whole capital punishment argument, but I feel like the death penalty, and that's kind of the easy way out. Like, shouldn't they spend their whole entire life in prison, like knowing what's out there, that they could be free, but they're stuck behind these walls? Like, I feel like that's more torturous than, I mean, firing squad would be pretty horrific and violent, but you know, some people might rather that.
Yeah. Like, some people feel like dying is better than being in prison forever, and some people feel like being in prison is better than dying. So I guess it just depends on the person. Because, I mean, some people, if they get sentenced to life in prison, they kill themselves anyway, just because they feel like that's the better option. So,
And I feel like if you're on, like, doing the death penalty, you're just still gonna take a while before you get put to death, right?
Like, it could have been,
Sometimes
yeah,
it
like
takes
it could be 20 years, like on death row for 20 years before you actually get to the day that you are killed or whatever. So I feel like, yeah, it's, I don't know. I just feel like I couldn't believe that it was only 20 years. Like, to me, that was just very light, and I did not think that's where it was going, because the whole time it's kind of like this looming over. It's like, well, she can't get the death penalty by firing squad, but you still think that they're going to go for the maximum that they possibly could if they couldn't get the death penalty. So it's just shocking. So did you guys have any like thoughts about the case in general, or about Jessica, or?
I just find it hard to believe that she hated Mirna over something so simple. Like, wasn't it just over like an argument or what Mirna said?
Well, I don't think it was like that specific thing. Like, I don't think it like, I think she was just, well, I mean, Mirna's sister Sandy says that she just thinks that Jessica was just jealous of Mirna's life in general and was bitter. She might have been having some mental health struggles, and obviously she was struggling with addiction too. I think she was just kind of on this downward path, and was obviously a very violent and vindictive person, and just was bitter that Mirna had such a good life and was, you know, getting married and everything, whereas her life was falling apart. So I don't think it was that one specific like comment by Mirna.
It also goes back to like the trial, how she was like smiling the whole time because she was like loving the attention, where like she was jealous of Mirna, so her other option was to like be in the spotlight of the media, because now all the attention was on her and everybody can pay attention to her. So it's kind of this like evil like you said, vindictive thing, because she killed her friend, but yeah, she's kind of happy because she was loving the attention from the media.
Yeah, and I think that that's too, a lot of times I've read it, I feel like I kind of got during research for this case, I kind of got a little bit of like Jodi Arias vibes, if anyone's familiar with that case, because that was also one that was very highly publicized. But that was also a similar theme, was that people were saying that Jodi loved the attention, she loved the interviews by the journalists, and she loved being like the front page news story. And some people were kind of saying that, you know, televising this is just playing into what these people want. You know, they want that notoriety. So there's a little bit of controversy there too, which played a part as well. But I'm just surprised that she even had a defense, or that she didn't just plead guilty. Like, the fact that she was pleading not guilty the whole time, obviously knew, or they felt strong enough in an argument that was going to let her get off, which to me is a little bit odd, because it seems so obvious. But I guess because they didn't have that physical footage of her placing it in the drink, they can't. It does leave a little bit of that room for ambiguity and theorizing, I guess, even though I think to the general population it seems pretty obvious.
Yeah, but there's also no footage of anyone else doing it either, and there's actual footage of the drink being made and then given to her. So there's nowhere along the line did someone do anything, except for when she was behind the bags being sketchy. So it seems like pretty obvious to me.
Yeah, like I said, it comes back to that manager saving the drink, which then comes back to Jessica herself making a comment about the drink, which is why she saved it. But if they didn't have that coffee cup to have test it and be like, there's traces of it in this coffee cup and they know it came from there, then the defense could have been like, well, who knows where that cyanide came from? You know, it's in her stomach, and that could have been how she died, but who knows? She could have eaten something before that had it, you know? So thank God they did save that coffee cup, because that is really what made it obvious that it was in that coffee cup, which really narrowed it down. Obviously, it's Jessica or a random employee, because they're the only people that are handling it, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so that is the case of Mirna Salihin, and yeah, it's pretty sad that, you know, it just, I don't know, it's just sad that, you know, they go from being best friend to that somebody could actually, knowing that somebody could actually do that to someone that they called their best friend, and see over seemingly nothing. But who really knows what's going through people's minds, honestly. And I guess the lesson of the episode is to don't let people pre-order your drinks. I don't know. Is that the takeaway from all of this?
I guess like it's a lesson. Just be vigilant. Don't trust anyone.
Yeah, and just order your own damn drinks, basically. So that does it for this episode of Crime Family. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and if you like the show and you want to interact with us, you can follow us on social media at Crime Family Podcast on Instagram, or at Crime Family Pod 1 on Twitter, and on Facebook at Crime Family Podcast. As always, you can send us an email, crimefamilypodcast@gmail.com, where you can send us your case suggestions or your feedback for the show, because we don't know what you guys want unless you tell us, and we don't know what's working, what's not working. I mean, we assume you like it because people are listening, but you know, if there's feedback you have, or something you want to let us know, or a case suggestion, just shoot us an email. We would love to hear it. You can also go to our website at crimefamilypodcast.ca. You can listen to all of our episodes there, and you can leave us a review as well on your favorite podcast app if they allow for reviews. So definitely do that on Apple Podcasts, because we love hearing your guys' thoughts. And yeah, we hope you're enjoying the season, and we enjoy doing it. So thank you so much, and until next time, take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.